All right, let's get right into it. Today, we are unpacking a really controversial plan that could see the Netherlands, a wealthy European country, pay Uganda to take on its rejected asylum seekers. It's a deal that's stirring up a huge global debate about borders and, about responsibility.
And that really is the million-dollar question, isn't it? Why on earth would a country like the Netherlands pay an African nation to handle its asylum cases? This whole idea points to a growing trend in Europe, basically outsourcing asylum responsibilities. So what's really going on here?
So on paper, the proposal looks pretty simple. An asylum seeker's application gets rejected in the Netherlands. But instead of waiting there, that person gets relocated all the way to Uganda. And it's from there that they wait to eventually be sent back to their home country.
To really get our heads around this, we need to look at how a deal like this would actually work. What are the mechanics of this partnership?
Okay, so let's break it down. It's basically a four-step chain of events. It all starts when an asylum claim is denied in the Netherlands. Step 2, that person is then flown to Uganda. In return, Step 3, the Dutch government gives Uganda financial and technical aid. And the final step, the person waits in Uganda to be repatriated. We're talking about a seriously complex logistical chain that stretches thousands and thousands of miles.
So this all brings us to the really crucial question. What's the motivation? What is driving these two very different nations to even consider a deal like this?
For the Netherlands, this didn't just come out of nowhere. It's actually the result of a shift that's been happening for decades. If you look back to the early 2000s, the country was known for having really progressive asylum policies. But then, starting around 2013, things began to get tighter and tighter, leading all the way up to 2023 with political promises for the strictest migration policy ever. This deal is a direct outcome of that whole political journey.
When you boil it all down, this deal is, well, it's a transaction. For the Netherlands, it's all about easing pressure at home and making good on political promises. But for Uganda, it's about getting much-needed funding for its own refugee programs and, frankly, gaining some prestige on the world stage. It's a pragmatic deal where both sides see something to gain.
Okay, let's switch gears and talk about Uganda's role in this, because this is where things get really interesting and full of contradictions. The country is often held up as a model for how to host refugees, but it's a model that is under an incredible amount of strain.
And just to give you a sense of the scale here, Uganda is already hosting over 1.5 million refugees. That's a massive number. Most are from neighboring countries like South Sudan and the DRC. This makes it one of the largest refugee hosting nations on the entire planet.
And they manage this huge population with something called the Uganda model. It's actually famous around the world because it's not like your typical refugee camp. It gives refugees the right to work, to move around freely, and they even get plots of land. The whole idea is to help them become independent.
But here's the paradox. This quote, and get this, it's from the Dutch government's own report, paints a completely different picture. It says conditions are dire, with shortages of food and water, and people surviving on one meal a day. So even with this progressive policy, the system is clearly stretched to its absolute limit.
So with all these complex pieces in play, it's really no wonder this whole deal has kicked up a major storm of criticism, and it's coming from all sides.
From a legal standpoint, the plan is on some pretty shaky ground. Critics are pointing out that it could violate the 1951 Refugee Convention, which is like the bedrock of international protection. There are huge concerns that it undermines the basic right to seek asylum, and that it could breach the principle of non-refoulement, which is the fundamental rule that you cannot send someone back to a place where they could be harmed.
And then you have the human rights alarms, which are ringing even louder. Uganda's 2023 Anti-Homosexuality Act brings in some really severe penalties, and that raises serious fears for the safety of any LGBTQIA+ asylum seekers sent there. So the bottom line here is that critics are saying this plan involves sending vulnerable people to a country with a very worrying human rights record, all for political convenience.
And what's really interesting is that the pushback isn't just coming from one political camp. In the Netherlands, you've got left-wing parties saying it's illegal and that the country is just outsourcing its moral duty. But you also have some right-wing parties who are against it too, but for different reasons, like national security concerns.
So let's zoom out. What does this one deal mean for the bigger picture? Because it could have some really profound effects on the future of asylum, not just in Europe, but globally.
Yeah, this deal is not happening in a bubble. Not at all. It's actually part of a much bigger global trend that some people call externalization. It looks a lot like other controversial plans. Maybe you've heard of the one between the UK and Rwanda. It seems wealthier nations are more and more trying to shift their asylum responsibilities far beyond their own borders. And that's where we get to the real long-term danger here.
Critics, including major international bodies like the UN's Refugee Agency, are warning this could set an incredibly dangerous precedent. They're worried it could create a kind of two-tiered system for refugees, wear away at global cooperation, and just make it normal to dump these responsibilities onto countries with far fewer resources. The fear is it could weaken the entire system that's supposed to protect refugees.
Which leaves us with this final, massive question. As more and more deals like this get put on the table, are we watching a fundamental shift in how the world handles its humanitarian duties? Are we stepping into a new era where protecting people is just outsourced, and where national interests are consistently prioritized over basic human rights? That's really the debate at the very heart of this story.